"You're black, you hurt my disabled child." Billionaire insults waitress not knowing about the truth. What if a billionaire accused you of hurting a disabled child, just because of your skin color? What if, in the face of his rage, the truth was so much more powerful than his wealth and status? Jasmine Brooks navigated the chaos of Lucille's Friday night dinner rush with the precision of a tightrope walker. At 30, her warm brown skin glowed under the restaurant's soft lighting, but the faint shadows under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights and relentless worries. Her black uniform hugged her frame, a badge of her role as a waitress in one of New York City's most exclusive establishments. But Jasmine was more than her job. She was a single mother to Noah, her 7-year-old son with cerebral palsy, whose wheelchair and infectious smile were as much a part of her life as her own heartbeat. Noah was her world, her reason to rise each morning despite the grind of 2 jobs, the endless medical bills, and the constant fight to secure him the best care and education. Tonight, he sat in the restaurant's back office, his small hands clutching crayons as he colored under the watchful eye of Sarah, the manager who treated him like her own. Jasmine's shifts at Lucille were brutal, long hours, demanding patrons and aching feet, but the tips were her lifeline, every dollar a step toward Noah's next therapy session or a new part for his wheelchair. She didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. Lucille's dining room was a spectacle of wealth. Crystal chandeliers casting prisms across white tablecloths, Wall Street tycoons sipping $1,000 wine, and celebrities hiding behind practiced smiles. Jasmine knew this world well, how to charm the entitled, deflect the rude, and stay invisible when needed. She moved like a shadow, her smile a shield, her focus unbreakable. At table 12 sat Charles Kingsley, a billionaire tech mogul whose name was synonymous with power and controversy. His gray suit was as sharp as his tongue, and his pale eyes scanned the room with the arrogance of a man who owned everything he saw. Jasmine had served him before. He tipped generously but spoke to her like she was furniture, his words clipped and his gaze never meeting hers. She didn't care. She just needed to survive the night. Across the room, at table 8, a new pair caught her eye. A woman with kind but weary eyes and her son, Max, about 8 years old, in a wheelchair. Max's movements were jerky, his speech limited to soft hums, but his smile was bright enough to light the room. Jasmine's heart tugged. She saw Noah in every child like Max. She made a mental note to check on them, to offer a warm word or a small act of kindness. It was what she did, who she was. The dinner rush hit its peak, a whirlwind of clattering plates, shouted orders, and overlapping voices. Jasmine moved with mechanical grace, her tray a balancing act of wine glasses and gourmet dishes. But then, a sharp cry cut through the noise, raw and desperate. It came from table 8. Max's wheelchair had tipped, perhaps caught on a chair leg or a fold in the rug, and he lay on the floor, his small body trembling as he cried out in distress. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She set her tray down and rushed to Max's side, her knees hitting the hardwood as she knelt beside him. "Hey, sweetheart, you're okay," she whispered, her voice a soothing anchor. She gently touched his shoulder, checking for injuries while murmuring words of comfort, the same ones she used when Noah had a bad day. Max's mother, flustered but grateful, was already there, struggling to lift him back into his chair. Jasmine helped, her hands steady as she secured Max, ensuring he was safe. The restaurant's buzz faded as patrons turned to stare. Some looked concerned, others merely curious, but one pair of eyes burned with something darker, something dangerous. Charles Kingsley shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was a mask of outrage, his pale eyes narrowing as he fixed them on Jasmine. "You black woman, how dare you hurt that poor child?" His voice thundered, silencing the restaurant. Every head turned, every conversation died. "Get your hands off him. You should be ashamed." Jasmine froze, her hands still on Max's wheelchair. The words hit like a fist, each one laced with venom and assumption. Her heart pounded, but she forced her voice to stay calm. "Sir, I was helping him. His chair tipped over. It was an accident. Don't lie to me." Charles snapped, his face reddening as he stepped closer. "I saw you. You were rough with him, and now he's on the floor, crying." He turned to the crowd, his voice booming with authority. "This is unacceptable. Where's the manager? I want this woman fired, now." The room was a vacuum, the air sucked out by his words. Patrons stared, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Jasmine felt the weight of their gazes, the sting of judgment burning her skin. She thought of Noah, coloring quietly in the office, oblivious to the storm brewing outside. She thought of the rent due next week, the wheelchair repairs she'd been saving for, the dreams she held for her son's future. Losing this job would be a disaster, but the humiliation, the accusation that her race made her guilty, threatened to break her. Max's mother, her face pale with shock, stood and tried to speak. "Please, it was an accident. She was helping my son." Charles cut her off, his hand raised like a gavel. "Don't defend her. I know what I saw." His words were a blade, slicing through the mother's plea and carving deeper into Jasmine's heart. She stood slowly, her hands trembling but her chin high. Years of navigating a world that judged her by her skin had taught her to stay composed, to survive. But this was different. This was public, raw, and cruel. Sarah, the manager, hurried over, her face tight with worry. "Mr. Kingsley, please, let's calm down. I saw everything." Jasmine was assisting the boy. "It was an accident." "An accident?" Charles scoffed, his eyes flicking to Jasmine with undisguised contempt. "She shouldn't be anywhere near that child. Look at her. She's incompetent." The word incompetent was a slap, but it was the unspoken accusation, the assumption that her blackness made her guilty, that cut deepest. Jasmine's mind raced. She wanted to scream, to tell him about Noah, about the nights she spent researching therapies, the days she fought with insurance companies, the love that drove her to keep going. But her voice stayed locked in her throat, trapped by fear and years of learned restraint. Max's mother stepped forward again, her voice shaking but resolute. "You're wrong, sir. My son fell because his chair malfunctioned. Jasmine was the first to help him, to comfort him. You have no right to speak to her like this." Charles's eyes narrowed, but he didn't back down. "I know what I saw. And I'm not letting this slide. I want her gone, or I'll make sure this place regrets it." The restaurant was a pressure cooker, the tension palpable. Patrons whispered, some siding with Charles's wealth and authority, others sensing the injustice but staying silent. Jasmine felt the walls closing in, her breath shallow. She wanted to run, to take Noah and disappear, but she couldn't. Not with Max's tear-streaked face looking up at her, his small hand reaching for hers. Not with Noah depending on her strength. Sarah raised her hands, her voice cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. "Everyone, please. Let's take a step back. I saw the entire incident. Jasmine did nothing wrong. She acted quickly to help the boy. This was an accident, nothing more." But Charles wasn't listening. His ego, inflated by years of unchecked privilege, refused to yield. "This is outrageous," he bellowed, his voice dripping with entitlement. "Do you know who I am? I could buy this restaurant and have you all out on the street by morning." That's when Max's mother stood taller, her weary eyes now blazing with resolve. "Mr. Kingsley," she said, her voice clear and commanding, "you've made a grave mistake. And I'm not just a mother. I'm Elizabeth Harper, a disability rights attorney. And I know exactly who you are." The room seemed to hold its breath. Elizabeth's words carried a weight that silenced even Charles for a moment. She continued, her voice steady but laced with righteous anger. "My son, Max, has severe cerebral palsy. His wheelchair tipped because of a design flaw in the chair, not because of Jasmine. She was the first to help him, to comfort him when he was scared. And you dared to accuse her based on nothing but your own prejudice." Charles opened his mouth to protest, but Elizabeth wasn't finished. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising with passion. "This man thinks his money gives him the right to judge, to humiliate, to control. But he's wrong. I know about your company, Mr. Kingsley. I know about the lawsuit you're fighting against a disability rights group. You're using your wealth to block legislation that would make public spaces more accessible for children like my son. Children like Jasmine's son. The mention of Noah sent a ripple through the crowd. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. How did Elizabeth know about Noah? She hadn't mentioned him, hadn't connected the dots. But before she could process it, Elizabeth turned to her, her eyes softening. Jasmine, you've been helping Max for months, haven't you? At the community center. Teaching him how to maneuver his chair better. I've seen you there with Noah. Jasmine's breath caught. She hadn't realized Elizabeth recognized her. The community center was her sanctuary, a place where she took Noah for therapy and volunteered to help other kids with disabilities. Max was one of them, his bright smile a mirror of Noah's. They'd spent hours together, Jasmine teaching Max small tricks to navigate his chair, just as she did with Noah. It was a quiet bond, one she hadn't thought anyone noticed. The crowd murmured, the pieces falling into place. Patrons who had nodded along with Charles now looked uneasy, their assumptions crumbling. Elizabeth's voice grew stronger. Jasmine is a mother who knows what it's like to fight for a child like mine. She's shown Max nothing but kindness, and you, Mr. Kingsley, have shown her nothing but cruelty. From the corner of the room, a small figure emerged, his wheelchair rolling quietly across the floor. Noah, guided by a staff member who had heard the commotion, looked out at the scene with wide, curious eyes. His crayons were still clutched in his hand, his coloring book tucked under his arm. "Mommy," he said, his voice small but clear in the heavy silence. "Why is that man yelling at you?" Jasmine's heart shattered and soared at the same time. She knelt beside Noah, brushing a hand over his cheek, her voice soft but steady. "It's okay, baby. Just a misunderstanding." But Noah wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Max, his friend from the community center. "Max, you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with the kind of concern only a child could muster. Max nodded, his smile returning despite the tears still drying on his cheeks. "Yeah. Your mom helped me." The patrons gasped softly, the connection dawning on them. Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Jasmine has been a mentor to Max. She's taught him how to be more independent, just like she's done for her own son. They've been friends for months, Mr. Kingsley. And you just humiliated a woman who's done nothing but good." Charles's face paled, his confidence crumbling. For the first time, he looked uncertain, his empire of power exposed as fragile. The crowd, once neutral, now murmured in disapproval. Some shook their heads, others whispered about his lawsuit, his arrogance, his prejudice. A few pulled out their phones, discreetly recording the scene. Elizabeth turned to Sarah, her voice resolute. "I'd like to cover the cost of everyone's meals tonight. And I want to make sure Jasmine is recognized for her kindness. She deserves better than this." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "Absolutely. Jasmine, you're not going anywhere. You're one of the best we have." The patrons erupted in applause, a wave of support washing over Jasmine. She stood, holding Noah's hand, her eyes wet but her head high. Charles, now silent, slunk back to his table, his power diminished in the face of truth. His outburst had backfired, exposing not just his prejudice but the larger battle he was waging against the very community he'd insulted. As the night wound down, Lucille returned to its rhythm, but the air was different. Patrons stopped by Jasmine's side, offering words of encouragement, some slipping extra tips into her hand with quiet apologies. One elderly woman, her diamonds glinting under the chandeliers, took Jasmine's hand and said, "You're a good mother. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Elizabeth and Max stayed late, chatting with Jasmine and Noah. The two boys, bonded by their shared experiences, laughed over a shared coloring book, their wheelchairs side by side. Elizabeth pulled Jasmine aside, her voice low. "I'm filing a formal complaint against Kingsley's company tomorrow. His actions tonight will be part of it. And I want you to know, if you ever need anything, legal or otherwise, I'm here." Jasmine nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you. For everything." Charles left without a word, his exit unnoticed by most. But his outburst would follow him. By morning, the story was all over social media, thanks to the patrons who had recorded Elizabeth's speech. Hashtags like #JusticeForJasmine and #DisabilityRights now trended, and news outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on Kingsley's lawsuit. The disability rights group he'd been fighting gained new momentum, their cause amplified by the viral moment. Jasmine went home that night with Noah, her heart heavy but full. She tucked him into bed, reading his favorite story about a boy who could fly despite his challenges. "Mommy," Noah said as she kissed his forehead, "you're my hero." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "And you're mine, baby." The next day, Jasmine returned to Lucille, her head held high. Sarah greeted her with a raise and a promise to advocate for better accessibility in the restaurant, inspired by Elizabeth's words. The staff rallied around her, their respect deepened by the night's events. Elizabeth became a regular, her friendship with Jasmine growing into a partnership of mutual support. They began working together at the community center, advocating for better resources for kids like Noah and Max. Noah and Max continued their adventures, their laughter echoing through the community center's halls. They were more than their wheelchairs, more than their challenges. They were friends, dreamers, and fighters. And Jasmine, their champion, stood taller than ever, her quiet strength a beacon for everyone around her. Jasmine's story wasn't just about one night in a fancy restaurant. It was about every day she chose to keep going, to love fiercely, to fight for her son and others like him. It was about a community that saw her, not as a stereotype, but as a woman of courage and compassion. It was about Elizabeth, who used her voice to amplify the truth, and Noah and Max, whose friendship proved that strength comes in many forms. Charles Kingsley's empire of wealth and prejudice took a hit that night, but the ripples went further. The lawsuit against his company gained traction, and within months, the accessibility legislation he'd fought was passed, a small but meaningful victory for families like Jasmine's and Elizabeth's. The world didn't change overnight, but it shifted, one heart at a time. Jasmine kept working, kept loving, kept dreaming. She wasn't just a waitress, a mother, or a survivor. She was a force, a reminder that dignity and kindness could outshine even the brightest chandeliers. And in the quiet moments, when she watched Noah sleep or saw Max master a new skill, she knew no amount of wealth could buy the strength she carried in her soul.